The air in the office was thick with the hum of servers and the smell of stale espresso. It was 2025, and the buyout of Max's startup, Aegiscore, was only weeks away. To the outside world, Max and his co-founder, Charlie, were the golden boys of the tech scene. But behind the glass walls of their sleek headquarters, the partnership was rotting. Charlie was the charismatic face of the company, the guy who could sell sand in a desert. But as the zeros on the buyout offer climbed, Charlie's greed had outpaced his patience. He'd started creative accounting, funneling company RD&O funds into a private offshore account, betting that the acquisition would bury the paper trail. Max saw it coming. He hadn't spent years building a data logistics firm without learning how to spot a glitch in the system. Max sat in a dimly lit booth at a diner 3 miles from the office, far from the prying eyes of their board members. Across from him sat Eddie, a private investigator with a background in forensic accounting and a face that looked like unrolled parchment. "He's getting sloppy, Max," Eddie said, sliding a manila folder across the cracked laminate table. "Charlie just authorized a consulting fee to a shell company in Panama. It's a direct violation of the merger's good faith clause." Max flipped through the wire transfer receipts. $500,000. Then another $250,000. "If the buyers see this before the closing, they'll pull the deal," Max said, his voice low and steady. "And I'm not letting 300 employees lose their payouts because Charlie wants a bigger yacht." Eddie leaned in. "I can take this to the feds tomorrow. We have enough to sink him." "No," Max countered, tapping his $15 watch, the same one he'd wear a year later. "Not yet. If we move now, the scandal kills the sale. We wait until the ink is dry on the buyout. Look here, the moment the funds are escrowed and the employees are protected, that's when we drop the hammer." Max's role? He had to play the oblivious tech nerd. He spent his days nodding at Charlie's presentations and laughing at his jokes, all while BCCing every suspicious email to Eddie. Charlie's mistake. He underestimated Max. He thought his partner was too focused on the surf and hike lifestyle to notice the missing millions. The tension was a physical weight. Every time Charlie clapped Max on the back and talked about life after the exit, Max had to keep his expression neutral. He was living a double life, the loyal partner by day, and the man building a cage for his best friend by night. "Keep a tail on him, Eddie," Max instructed as they left the diner. "If he tries to move the rest of the liquid assets before Friday, we may have to move early." "You're playing a dangerous game, kid," Eddie warned. "If he catches wind that you're onto him, he might burn the whole house down just to spite you." Max looked toward the coast. "I've spent my life navigating 10-foot swells. I know how to wait for the right wave." The rain was slicking the pavement outside a high-end steakhouse where Charlie was meeting a consultant from the Panama Shell Company. Eddie sat in a nondescript sedan half a block away, his long lens camera resting on the passenger seat. Eddie had been at this for 30 years, but Charlie was wired on adrenaline and greed, the most dangerous kind of target. Charlie stepped out of the restaurant, shouting into his phone over the roar of a passing bus. He looked agitated, pacing the sidewalk in his $4,000 suit. Suddenly, he stopped dead and spun around, squinting through the downpour toward Eddie's car. Eddie slumped lower in his seat, pulling a tattered road map over his face like a tired traveler lost in the city. Charlie started walking, not toward his valet-parked SUV, but straight toward Eddie. He was 20 feet away, now 10. He tapped hard on Eddie's driver's side window with a heavy gold ring. Eddie rolled down the window halfway, squinting with practiced, bleary-eyed confusion. "You've been behind me since the office, old man," Charlie sneered, his eyes darting to the shadowed interior of the car. "Who are you? Competitor? Press?" Eddie coughed a wet, raspy sound and held up the map. "I'm looking for the interstate, pal. This GPS is junk, and I can't see a damn thing in this soup." Charlie leaned in, his nose inches from the glass. His gaze brushed over the camera bag hidden under a gym shirt on the floorboards. Likely story. Let me see your phone. Just as Eddie's hand drifted toward the door handle, his phone buzzed on the dashboard. The caller ID flashed. Max. Charlie saw it. He froze. Why is my partner calling a lost tourist? Before Charlie could grab the device, Eddie hit speakerphone. Hey, sorry to bother you, Max's voice came through, calm and perfectly pitched. I just got a notification that someone tried to log into the secure server from a mobile device near 4th and Main. I thought it might be you, but I couldn't reach your cell. You okay? Charlie blinked, his suspicion momentarily derailed by the technical glitch. He glanced at his own phone. It was dead, likely from his hour-long shouting match. I'm at 4th and Main now, Charlie muttered into Eddie's window, though he was speaking to Max. My phone died. I'll be back in 20. Cool, Max replied. Check your battery, man. And watch out for the traffic. It's a mess out there. Charlie shoved off the car with a look of pure annoyance, dismissing Eddie as a meaningless coincidence linked to a tech error. He jogged toward his SUV, convinced Max was back at the office being a useful nerd. Eddie waited until the taillights vanished before letting out a breath that fogged the entire windshield. He picked up the phone. That was close, Max. Too close. I saw his GPS ping stop right next to yours on the shared drive. Max's voice was no longer casual. It was cold. Get out of there. He's spooked. We don't track him physically anymore. From here on out, we stay in the digital shadows until the buyout hits. The morning of the buyout felt like any other at Aegis Core, except for the underlying electric hum of life-changing money. Charlie arrived in a custom-tailored suit, practically vibrating with ego. He walked into the boardroom, flashing a blinding smile at the representatives from the acquiring firm. Max was already there, wearing his usual faded polo and holding a lukewarm coffee. He looked tired. The look of a man who had spent the last 48 hours ensuring every digital trapdoor was locked. The lead attorney slid the final signature pages across the mahogany table. Charlie grabbed a silver fountain pen, his hand steady as a rock. To a new era, Charlie toasted, scribbling his name with a flourish. Max signed his own name with a simple ballpoint pen. He watched the digital clock on the wall. 10 a.m. The wire transfer hit the escrow account. The employees' bonuses were officially locked in. The company was no longer theirs. Well, gentlemen, Charlie said, standing up and smoothing his jacket. It's been a pleasure. Max, I'll see you at the gala tonight. I've got a bottle of 1945 Mouton Rothschild waiting. I don't think you'll make the gala, Charlie, Max said quietly. Charlie laughed, a sharp barking sound. What? Planning on hitting the trails early? Let the nerds celebrate for once. The heavy oak doors of the boardroom opened. It wasn't the catering staff. It was Eddie, looking sharp in a charcoal suit, followed by two men in windbreakers with Federal Bureau of Investigation printed across the back. Charlie's face went from tan to gray in 3 seconds. Max? What is this? Some kind of joke? Eddie stepped forward, dropping a thick stack of documents onto the table, the same ones Charlie thought were buried in Panama. Mr. Vance, we've been monitoring the offshore accounts you've been using to siphon RD&O funds. We have the logs, the IP addresses, and the testimony of the consultant you met in the rain last Tuesday. Max, tell them! Charlie hissed, turning to his partner. This is a mistake. We're partners. Max stood up, sliding his $15 watch into his pocket. We were partners, Charlie, until you decided my employees' futures were less important than your offshore balance. I've been working with Eddie and the Bureau for 6 months. I didn't want to burn the company, so I waited until the sale was final. Everyone else is safe. You're the only one going down. As the agents let a swearing, panicked Charlie out the back exit, the boardroom fell silent. Eddie turned to Max. You did it, kid. You saved the deal and caught the shark. I just want to go surfing, Eddie, Max sighed, looking out the window at the distant blue of the Pacific. Max adjusted the $15 digital watch on his wrist, the plastic strap pulling slightly at his skin. It was 6 a.m., and the light over the Pacific was a bruised purple. He pulled his surfboard, waxed, dinged, and well-loved, from the back of an old hatchback that groaned every time it hit a pothole. To anyone watching, he was just another guy in a thrifted flannel and faded jeans, likely heading to a shift at a local shop. In reality, Max's bank account had more commas in it than his beat-up car had miles. Selling his tech startup had been a whirlwind of suits, NDAs, and a wire transfer that felt surreal. But the moment the ink dried, Max realized he didn't want the penthouse or the Italian sports car. He liked his quiet life. He liked that when he walked into the local diner, people knew him for his mediocre surfing skills, not his net worth. The routine most days started on the water, followed by a long hike into the coastal range or a grueling mountain bike session. The gear, his hiking boots, were resold 3 times. His mountain bike was high, in his one true indulgence, but he'd spray painted, the frame matte black to hide the brand name. The social circle, he kept things tight. After a string of relationships in his late 20s that felt like a series of almosts and not quites, he'd grown weary of the performative nature of dating. One afternoon, Max headed to the local range. Shooting was his meditation, a test of focus and breath. He was lining up a shot with his favorite bolt action when the person in the lane next to him cleared a jam with practiced ease. She was wearing a shirt from a local nonprofit and looked like she'd just come from a trail run. They struck up a conversation over the smell of spent brass and cordite. She laughed when he mentioned he'd found his vintage jacket in a fill-a-bag bin at the thrift store. "I respect the hustle," she said, wiping carbon from her hands. "Most guys in this town try way too hard to look like they're winning." Max felt a familiar spark, but this time it didn't feel heavy with expectation. She didn't know about the millions. She didn't know he could buy the range they were standing in. She just saw a guy with a cheap watch who knew how to hold a group at 100 yards. As they walked out to the parking lot, Max felt the weight of his secret. He wasn't lying. Exactly. He was just protecting the person he actually was. "Nice car," she teased, nodding at his rusted hatchback. "It's got character." "It gets me to the beach," Max shrugged, smiling as he unlocked the door with a physical key. "That's all I really need." "Well, my name is Mia," she said, holding out her hand. Max blinked, momentarily flustered. "Oh, I'm very sorry. Yes, my name is Max. It's nice to meet you." "Okay, Max. I'll see you around," she replied with a small smile. "For sure," Max called after her, watching her walk away. Mia doesn't see a charming guy with a thrifty wardrobe. She sees a red flag on a spreadsheet. In the fraud division, someone who officially earns minimum wage but has millions moving through offshore accounts or sudden startup buyouts is usually a sign of money laundering or tax evasion. Mia the professional, she's sharp, cynical, and has spent her career seeing the worst in people. To her, too good to be true is usually a crime. The conflict. She's been assigned to flag high-value ghost accounts, individuals with massive wealth who maintain a near-zero footprint. Max is at the top of her list. The tactic. She didn't meet him at the range by accident. She's been tracking his hobbies to find an in. A week later, they meet for tacos at a hole-in-the-wall spot Max loves. He's wearing a faded band tee he's owned for a decade. She's in a simple hoodie, but her mind is running an interrogation script. "So, Max," Mia says, breaking a chip. "Building a startup must have been exhausting. What was the name of that company you said you worked for again?" Max pauses, his internal alarm bells silent. "Just a small tech firm. Data logistics. It went under a while back, so I'm just coasting on savings and doing some odd jobs." Mia's internal monologue. "Liar, I saw the acquisition papers. You didn't go under. You cashed out for 8 figures. As the night goes on, the chemistry is undeniable, which makes Mia's job even harder. Max's perspective, he thinks he's finally found someone who likes him for his personality, not his bank account. He feels a sense of relief he hasn't felt in years. Mia's perspective, she's looking for the slip-up. She notices his $15 watch, but then she looks at his hands, clean, well manicured. Not the hands of someone working manual labor for $15K a year. As they walk back to their cars, Max mentions he's planning a solo bike trip up the coast next weekend. Sounds lonely, Mia says, testing the waters. Need a partner? I promise I can keep up. Max beams, thinking he's winning. Mia smiles back, knowing that a weekend trip is the perfect time to get a look at his phone or his real documents when he thinks she's asleep. Mia sat in her dimly lit home office, the blue light of her dual monitors reflecting in her glasses. She had been digging through Max's digital footprint for weeks, and she finally found the smoking gun, or so she thought. She had intercepted an encrypted message routed through a secure federal server. It was sent to Max's private, unlisted email address just days after the Aegis Corps buyout. From E. Drake Direct Source to M. Grant. Message: the package has been delivered to the designated account. Your cooperation in this matter was invaluable. Without your technical adjustments to the ledger, we never would have closed the gap. Again, thank you. Consider this a debt repaid. Talk soon. The misinterpretation. To Mia, this didn't look like justice. It looked like a payoff. The package. She assumed it was a kickback from a corrupt official. The technical adjustments. In her world of fraud investigation, adjusting the ledger was synonymous with cooking the books. The debt repaid. She suspected Max had bought protection from someone high up in the bureau to ensure his startup sale went through despite the irregularities she was sensing. She didn't know that E is Eddie and he was Max's handler at the FBI, or that the package was actually the recovered stolen funds being returned to the company's pension pool. The next day, Max met Mia for a hike. He looked as unassuming as ever in his thrift store cargo shorts and a tattered backpack. He was smiling, genuinely happy to see her. Completely unaware that she had a printout of that email tucked into the side pocket of her bag. You seem far away, Max said as they reached a lookout point over the ocean. Everything okay at work? Mia looked at him, her heart doing a painful somersault. He looked so honest, the kind of guy who would stop to help a turtle cross the road. But the email in her bag told a story of a high-level shadow player who manipulated federal systems. Work is complicated, Mia replied, her voice tighter than usual. I'm dealing with someone who thinks they're invisible. Someone who thinks they can buy their way out of anything. Max nodded, looking out at the waves. Money does strange things to people. That's why I try to keep things simple. Mia reached into her bag, her fingers brushing the paper. She was supposed to wait for her team. She was supposed to follow protocol. But the disconnect between the man standing in front of her and the criminal on her screen was driving her crazy. Max, she said, her voice dropping an octave. Who is E? The color drained from Max's face. It wasn't the look of a guilty man caught in a lie. It was the look of a man whose dangerous past had just walked into his peaceful present. Max's grip tightened on the strap of his weathered backpack. For a split second, the relaxed surfer persona flickered, replaced by the cold, calculating mind that had dismantled a multi-million-dollar fraud scheme. I don't know an E, Max said, his voice dropping into a flat, neutral tone that Mia recognized instantly from her interrogation training. It was the sound of a man hitting a stone wall. Max knew that if he told her the truth, that Eddie Miller was his FBI contact, he might blow the secondary investigation. Charlie hadn't acted alone. He had associates in the banking sector who were still being tracked. If word got back to the bureau that a local fraud investigator was poking around, the whole operation could collapse. Max's thought, he has to let Mia believe he's a criminal to keep the larger case alive. Mia. She sees his poker face as a confirmation of guilt. The hike back down the trail was silent, the air thick with unspoken accusations. Max kept his eyes on the path, his mind racing. He wanted to tell her everything, to explain that he lived like this because he'd seen how money corrupted Charlie. But he couldn't. When they reached the parking lot, Mia didn't wait for him to open her door. She turned to him, her eyes sharp and professional. "I'm a fraud investigator, Max," she said, finally dropping the act. "I don't believe in coincidences. And I definitely don't believe in simple guys who get personal thank you notes from federal signatures." Max leaned against his rusted hatchback, looking every bit the $15,000 a year man he pretended to be. "Then you should keep investigating, Mia. Just make sure you're looking at the whole picture before you decide who the villain is." Mia drove away, her hands shaking on the steering wheel. She didn't go home. She went straight to the office. She began pulling every file associated with the Aegis Corps Borb Widge out, looking for a link between Max and the E. Drake signature. Meanwhile, Max pulled his burner phone from a hidden compartment in his car. He dialed Eddie. "We have a problem," Max said as soon as the line picked up. "The fraud division is on to the Drake email. They're looking at me. If they dig too deep, they're going to trip the wires on the Charlie and blow this case." "Stay dark, Max," Eddie's voice crackled. "Don't see her again. If she's good at her job, she's going to follow the money. And the money leads to places that aren't safe for a simple guy like you." Mia wasn't supposed to be there, but the professional itch, the one that told her Max was hiding a mountain behind a molehill, wouldn't let her sleep. She used a wellness-checked excuse with the landlord of Max's modest, drafty apartment complex. The place was exactly as he presented it: a thrift store sofa, a stack of paperback thrillers, and a kitchen that looked like it belonged to a college student. Then she saw the loose floorboard under the bed. She didn't find stacks of cash or a ledger of crimes. Instead, tucked into a waterproof, military-grade rucksack, she found a go bag that told a much more dangerous story than she expected. The documents. 3 different passports. One was his real one, but 2 others had his face with different names and nationalities, UK and Canadian. The tech. A satellite phone, a high-end encrypted laptop, and a specialized signal jammer. The kind of gear used by corporate espionage experts or deep-cover assets. The hardware. A compact high-caliber handgun with 2 spare magazines and a custom suppressor. To a fraud investigator, this didn't look like a whistleblower's kit. It looked like a cleaner or a high-level bagman for a cartel. Mia felt a chill run down her spine. The simple guy who liked to hike wasn't just hiding money. He was prepared to vanish off the face of the earth at a moment's notice. She pulled out her phone to call in a tactical team when the front door creaked. Max stood in the doorway, a bag of groceries in one hand and his bike helmet in the other. He didn't look like a killer, but he didn't look like a surfer anymore either. His eyes dropped to the open bag on the bed, then up to Mia's badge. "Mia," he said, his voice terrifyingly calm. "If you call that in, you're signing a death warrant. Not mine, yours. And everyone in the FBI field office who's currently tracking Charlie's buyers. You have a suppressed weapon and 3 passports. Max," Mia snapped, her hand hovering over her own service weapon. "In my world, that's not data logistics. That's a professional runner." "It's a contingency," Max countered, stepping further into the room. "The people Charlie sold out to. They don't just sue you. They erase you. Eddie gave me that bag because he knows the Bureau can't protect me if the leak comes from the inside." The twist, Mia froze. "The leak from the inside? What are you talking about? Why do you think your department was flagged to investigate me for fraud right now, of all times?" Max asked, his eyes searching hers. "Someone in your division is on Charlie's payroll. They sent you after me to see how much I've told the feds. You're not investigating a criminal, Mia. You're being used as a bird dog to find out where the witness is hiding." Mia's training took over. In the fraud division, she'd heard every silver-tongued excuse in the book. The "I'm secretly the good guy" play was a classic maneuver used by high-level white-collar criminals to stall for time. "Hands where I can see them, Max," she commanded, her voice steady and cold. "If there's a mole in my department, we'll find them. But right now, you're a man with a suppressed firearm and multiple identities. That makes you a flight risk and a person of interest." Max didn't fight. He didn't even look angry. He looked disappointed. He dropped the groceries, a jar of salsa shattered on the linoleum, and raised his hands. Mia called it in. Within 10 minutes, 2 unmarked black SUVs screeched into the gravel lot of the apartment complex. Neighbors watched from behind twitching curtains as the quiet surfer guy was led out in handcuffs, a windbreaker draped over his wrists to hide the steel. The gear, the go bag, the passports, and the tech were logged into evidence. Mia handled the chain of custody personally, refusing to let anyone else touch the encrypted laptop. The interrogation room. The room was windowless, smelling of industrial cleaner and stale coffee. Max sat bolted to the chair, still wearing his thrift store flannel. He looked remarkably relaxed for a man facing federal charges. Mia sat across from him, tossing the 3 passports onto the metal table. Max Grant, Mark Davis, David Johnson. She read the names off the IDs. "You've got a busy life for a guy who makes $15K a year. Who are you working for? Is it Charlie's old associates? Are you the one moving the remaining liquid assets?" Max leaned forward, the shadows under his eyes deepening. "Mia, look at the timestamps on the Canadian passport. It was issued 3 days after Charlie was arrested. Eddie Drake didn't give me those to run from the law. He gave them to me so I wouldn't end up like the lead auditor on the Aegis deal, the one who had a heart attack in a gym sauna last month." Mia paused. She knew about the auditor. The coroner had ruled it natural causes, but the timing had always bothered her. "You're a master at this," she whispered, leaning in. "The modest car, the cheap watch. It's all part of the honest guy brand, isn't it? You sold a company for millions and kept playing the martyr." "I kept playing the man I wanted to be," Max corrected. "But if you keep me in this room for more than 2 hours, the people Eddie and Sue is tracking will know the data guy is off the board. They'll clear the accounts and vanish. You're not catching a criminal, Mia. You're clearing the path for them." Suddenly, the heavy door to the interrogation room swung open. It wasn't Mia's boss. It was a senior director from the division she barely recognized. A man named Director Morgan. "Mia, step outside," Morgan ordered, his face a mask of bureaucratic steel. "There's been a jurisdictional override. This case is being moved to national security. We're taking the prisoner and the evidence bag." Mia felt a cold pit in her stomach. Max's words about a mole echoed in her head. Morgan was the one who had personally signed her authorization to investigate Max. Mia's pulse hammered against her neck, but her training was a straitjacket. In the world of federal investigation, jumping at mole theories without hard evidence was a one-way ticket to a psych eval and a stripped badge. "Understood, Director," she said, her voice clipped and professional. She stood up, smoothing her blazer, and stepped away from the metal table. The handover. Max watched her, his expression unreadable as the 2 suits behind Morgan moved in. They didn't treat him like a white-collar fraud suspect. They handled him with a rough, practiced efficiency that suggested he was a high-value asset being moved to a black site. The evidence. Morgan's assistant swept the go bag, the 3 passports, and the encrypted laptop into a reinforced case. The exchange. As Max was hauled up from the bolted chair, his shoulder brushed Mia's. For a split second, his gaze locked onto hers, not with anger, but with a cold, terrifying clarity. "Keep your eyes on the ledger, Mia," Max whispered, so low only she could hear. "Check the timestamp on the transfer to Panama. It didn't happen from my IP." Morgan placed a firm hand on Max's arm, steering him out. "That's enough. Officer, return to your desk and file the transfer report. This case is officially redacted." Mia stood in the empty interrogation room for a long minute, the silence ringing in her ears. She walked back to her cubicle, the fluorescent lights suddenly feeling too bright, too sterile. She did exactly what she was told. She opened the case management system to file the jurisdictional transfer paperwork. But as she typed in Max's file number, she saw something that made her breath hitch. The file was already gone. In its place was a 404 access denied screen, not just moved wiped. It was as if Max Grant, the startup sale, and the go bag had never existed in the division's database. Mia looked across the office. Director Morgan was in his glass-walled office, leaning back in his leather chair, a phone pressed to his ear. He caught her eye and slowly pulled the blinds shut. Mia felt the weight of the Walmart watch Max had been wearing, the one currently sitting in a black CV heading toward an unknown destination. She realized then that by following orders, she hadn't just closed a case. She had handed the only man who knew the truth over to the people who wanted it buried. Mia sat at her desk, staring at the blinking cursor on her blank screen. The silence in the office felt like a physical weight. If she followed protocol now, she was just filing a eulogy for a man who might not make it through the night. She reached into her drawer and pulled out the one thing she hadn't logged into evidence. The slip of paper where she'd scribbled the E. Drake contact info from the intercepted email. She didn't use her work phone. She walked 3 blocks to a convenience store, bought a cheap prepaid flip phone, and dialed the number. It rang once, twice, then a click. Voice. "You're late, Mia." Mia froze. "How do you know who this is?" "I've been watching you watch him for 3 weeks. Eddie's voice was like gravel over silk. "And I saw Morgan's SUVs leave the building 10 minutes ago. You handed him over." "I followed orders," Mia hissed, ducking into a quiet alleyway. "Morgan had a jurisdictional override. He wiped the files, Eddie. The system is clean. It's like Max never existed." "Because to Morgan he doesn't," Eddie replied. "Max isn't a fraud suspect. He's the only person who can unlock the secondary encryption on the Panama accounts. Morgan isn't arresting him. He's interrogating him for the keys to $100 million. Where are they taking him?" Mia asked, her heart hammering. "Meet me at the pier, Pier 47. Blue sedan. Come alone or don't come at all." When Mia arrived, the salt air was thick and the fog had rolled in, masking the city lights. Eddie was leaning against the car, looking every bit the weary investigator. He didn't look like a hero. He looked like a man who had seen too many good people disappear. The intel. Eddie opened a laptop on the trunk of his car. A map of the city pulsed with a small red dot. The tracker. "I put a tracker in Max's $15 watch months ago," Eddie muttered. "He knows it's there. That's why he made sure to have it on him today. He knew Morgan would move eventually." The destination. The dot was stationary at an old industrial dry dock on the edge of the city. "Morgan has a security detail," Eddie said, looking Mia in the eye. "Ex-military, paid under the table. If we go in there, we're not law enforcement. We're just 2 people interfering with a very expensive payday. You ready to lose that badge for real?" Mia looked at the red dot on the screen. She thought about Max's modest apartment, his resold boots, and the way he'd looked at her in the interrogation room, not with a plea for help, but with a warning. "I think I lost the badge the second I let them take him," Mia said, checking the magazine on her sidearm. "Let's go get the data guy back." The fog at the industrial dry dock was so thick, it swallowed the sound of the lapping waves. Mia and Eddie sat in the darkened sedan, watching the perimeter. 2 guards in tactical gear paced the entrance of a rusted warehouse, their movements synchronized and professional. "They aren't just guards," Eddie whispered, checking the glow of the tracker. "They're contractors. High-end. If we do this by the book, we're dead. We do it my way. At best, we might just be unemployed." The bluff, Mia's lead. Mia stepped out of the car. adjusting her blazer and pulling her federal ID. She walked toward the main gate with a confidence she didn't feel, her heels clicking sharply on the damp asphalt. "Internal affairs?" she barked as the guards leveled their weapons. She didn't flinch. Director Morgan requested an immediate sit-rep on the asset. "There's been a leak at the main office. We think the PI is tipped off." The guards hesitated. Her badge was real. Her tone was perfect. "The director didn't mention a sweep," one guard countered, his hand hovering over his radio. "That's because the director doesn't want the rest of his team knowing he let a rogue investigator track the transport." Mia snapped. "Now, are you going to let me in to secure the encryption keys? Or am I going to tell Morgan you're the reason this $100 million deal goes sideways?" The guard hesitated, then stepped aside, swiping his keycard. Section 4. He's in the back office. While Maya kept the guards occupied with a fabricated security audit in the front, Eddie slipped through a jagged hole in the perimeter fence. He moved like a shadow, years of surveillance work making him nearly invisible in the gloom. Inside the warehouse, the air smelled of salt and old oil. He reached the back office just in time to see Morgan leaning over a tied-up Max. A laptop sat on the table between them, the encrypted one from the go bag. "Last chance, Max," Morgan hissed. "The password for the secondary layer. I know you didn't build this company just to let the money sit in a vault you can't touch." "I built it so people like you couldn't touch it," Max replied, his voice raspy but firm. Eddie didn't wait. He threw a flashbang through the high window. The office exploded in white light. Mia's move. Hearing the blast, Mia didn't hesitate. She drew her weapon, disarmed the guard nearest to her with a swift kick to the knee, and dove behind a stack of shipping crates. "Federal agent, drop the weapons!" she yelled, creating enough confusion to keep the perimeter team from rushing back inside. The rescue. Eddie dropped through the rafters, landing behind Morgan. Before the director could rub the spots from his eyes, Eddie had him in a chokehold. Max, realizing the distraction was his only window, leaned back in his chair and kicked the table hard into Morgan's shins. "Max, move!" Eddie shouted, tossing a pocket knife toward him. Max sliced through his zip ties in seconds. He didn't grab the money. He grabbed the encrypted laptop, the only evidence that linked Morgan to the offshore accounts. They met at the side exit. Mia was covering the rear, her breath hitching as she saw Max emerge, looking bruised but alive. "The guards are calling for backup," she warned, gesturing toward the sedan idling at the fence line. "We have about 90 seconds before this place is swarmed." "I got the drive," Max said, holding up the laptop. He looked at Mia, the $15 watch still strapped to his wrist, its face cracked from the struggle. "You really are a terrible follower of orders." "It's a hobby," she joked breathlessly as they piled into the car. The blue sedan tore away from the dry dock, the tires screaming against the wet pavement. Mia kept her eyes on the rearview mirror, watching the silhouettes of Morgan's contractors shrinking in the fog. "We can't go to the police, and we definitely can't go to my office," Mia said, her voice tight. "If Morgan wiped Max's file, he's already flagged my credentials as compromised. Every federal building in the state is a trap for us now." Eddie steered the car onto a dirt access road that led deep into the coastal woods. "I've got a spot, an old safe house from the Cold War era. It's off the grid, no digital footprint. If there's anyone left in the bureau who isn't on a payroll, they'll be using the old school channels." The house was a cabin that looked like it was rotting into the earth. But the door was reinforced steel with a biometric scanner that Eddie bypassed with a physical key and a coded sequence. Inside, it was a high-tech bunker, disguised as a hermit's shack. Eddie immediately started flipping switches, powering up a localized server that didn't broadcast a signal. Max sat at a metal desk, his hands finally steady. He plugged the encrypted laptop into the safe house's monitor. Morgan didn't just want the money, he wanted the list. As the decryption bars crawled across the screen, a directory appeared. It wasn't just Charlie's associates. It was a payroll of public officials, judges, and 3 other directors in Mia's division. "My God," Mia whispered, leaning over his shoulder. "It's a network." The startup buyout was just the washing machine they used to clean the bribe money. Eddie picked up a heavy, outdated radio handset. "There's one person, Assistant Director Sarah Vance. She's old school. She hated Charlie and she never trusted Morgan. If she picks up, we have a chance. If she doesn't, we're just 3 people in a basement with a lot of dangerous secrets." The radio crackled with static. Eddie spoke a string of numbers, a code from a decade ago. Minutes passed in agonizing silence. Then, a woman's voice, sharp and weary, came through the speaker. "Eddie, I heard you were dead or retired in Mexico." "I'm neither, Sarah. I'm sitting with a whistleblower and a rogue investigator. We have the Aegis Corps payroll. Morgan is the gatekeeper." There was a long pause. "Morgan is at a gala tonight at the Fairmont. He's about to be honored for distinguished service. If you have proof, you have 2 hours to get it to me before he becomes untouchable." Max looked at his cracked Walmart watch. It was 7:30 p.m. The gala started at 8 o'clock. "He's going to be surrounded by security and the press," Max said, his eyes flicking to Mia. "He thinks we're either dead or running for the border. He won't expect us to walk into the lion's den." Mia checked her service weapon. She had 1 magazine left. "We don't need to shoot him. We just need to get that laptop to the projection booth. If he wants to be honored, let's give him the tribute he deserves." Max stood up, smoothing out his dirt-stained flannel. "I don't have a tuxedo." "Good," Eddie grinned, handing Max a heavy tactical tablet. "You look like exactly what you are, a guy who's tired of people stealing from his friends. That plays better on camera anyway." The Fairmont was a fortress of glass, gold leaf, and high-end security. Limousines lined the curb, and the air was filled with the scent of expensive perfume and Cuban cigars. Inside, the city's elite were gathering to toast Director Morgan's unmatched integrity. Mia didn't hide. She pulled the blue sedan right up to the valet stand, the engine ticking as it cooled. She stepped out, her federal badge clipped to her belt, her hair windswept and her blazer stained with industrial dust from the dry dock. "Federal Agent Mia Vance," she shouted, her voice cutting through the polite chatter of the lobby. "I have an active warrant for Director Morgan. Secure the perimeter now." The security team scrambled. Radios crackled as the compromised alert Mia expected flashed across their handhelds. She began barking orders at the private security guards, intentionally creating a jurisdictional nightmare. She accused them of obstructing a federal investigation, drawing every eye and every camera phone in the lobby toward the front doors. Morgan's lead contractors rushed from their interior posts to the lobby to intercept her. The service entrance and the kitchen corridors were left guarded by nothing but skeleton crews. While Mia held center stage, Max and Eddie slipped through the loading dock, dressed in stained coveralls they'd lifted from the safe house. Max carried a heavy tool case. Inside was the encrypted laptop and a wireless transmitter. 30 seconds, Eddie whispered, checking his earpiece. "Mia's got them tied in knots. Move!" They bypassed the service elevators, taking the stairs 2 at a time. Max's heart hammered against his ribs. He wasn't a soldier or a spy. He was a guy who liked mountain bikes and quiet mornings. But as he reached the projection booth overlooking the grand ballroom, he felt a strange, cold calm. Inside the ballroom, Director Morgan stood at the podium, bathed in a warm spotlight. "Integrity," Morgan began, his voice booming through the speakers, "is the bedrock of our division. Without trust, we have nothing." In the darkened booth, Max bypassed the technician's terminal. His fingers flew across the keys of his laptop. He didn't just have the payroll. He had the audio recording from the dry dock. Morgan's own voice demanding the encryption keys. "Now," Max muttered. The massive LED screens behind Morgan flickered. The celebratory slideshow vanished. In its place, a spreadsheet appeared, rows of names, bank routing numbers, and the Aegis Corps logo at the top. Then, the audio kicked in. I know you didn't build this company just to let the money sit in a vault you can't touch. Give me the password, Max. The ballroom went deathly silent. Morgan froze, his hand still raised in a half-finished gesture of humility. He looked up at the screen, his face drained of color as his own voice echoed off the gilded ceiling. From the back of the room, Assistant Director Sarah Vance stepped forward, flanked by a dozen uniformed agents who weren't on Morgan's payroll. Director Morgan, she said, her voice amplified by the stunned silence. I believe your distinguished service is over. An hour later, the Fairmont was a crime scene. Morgan was led out in the same heavy steel handcuffs he'd intended for Max. Mia stood on the sidewalk, watching the flashing blue lights. She felt a hand on her shoulder. It was Max. He'd ditched the coveralls, standing there in his thrift store flannel, looking exhausted. You're definitely out of a job, Max said softly. I think I'm okay with that, Mia replied, looking at him. What about you? You're a multi-millionaire whistleblower with no secret life left. What's the plan? Max looked down at his cracked 180 degrees Celsius heated, metaphorically speaking, Walmart watch. He unbuckled the plastic strap and handed it to her. I'm going to buy a better watch, he joked, a small, tired smile tugging at his lips. And then I'm going to go for a hike. Somewhere where nobody knows my name. You want to come? Mia took the watch, her fingers brushing his. Only if you let me drive. Your car is a death trap. The salt air was crisp as Max's beat-up hatchback pulled onto a scenic turnout overlooking the Pacific. For the first time in years, the silence wasn't heavy with the weight of a secret. It was just quiet. Mia leaned against the hood of the car, looking out at the surfers catching the last of the evening light. She'd officially resigned from the bureau that morning. Her credentials were gone, but for the first time, she felt like she was actually on the right side of the law. You know, she said, glancing at Max's thrift store sneakers, Morgan's legal team is going to try to freeze your assets during the trial. You might actually have to live on $15,000 a year for a while. Max laughed, a genuine, relaxed sound. I've been practicing for 3 years, Mia. I think I'll manage. He reached into the back of the car and pulled out 2 mountain bikes. One was his spray-painted matte black Indulgence, and the other was a sturdy trail bike he'd picked up for her at a local shop that morning. The plan: no more black sites, no more encrypted laptops, and no more E-Drake on burner phones. The destination: a trail that wound through the redwoods, miles away from the nearest cell tower or fiber optic cable. The gear: a simple backpack with some water, a map, and enough sandwiches for 2. As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of deep orange and bruised purple, they began to ride. Max led the way, his form easy and practiced. Mia followed close behind, finding her rhythm in the gear shifts and the dirt beneath her tires. The millions were still in the bank. The trial of the century was brewing back in the city, and Charlie's associates were likely scrambling in the shadows. But as they disappeared into the tree line, none of that mattered. Max Grant wasn't a CEO, a whistleblower, or a millionaire. He was just a guy on a bike, riding into the woods with a woman who finally knew exactly who he was. About 1 year later, the world had mostly forgotten the name Max Grant. The Aegis Corps scandal had dominated the news cycles for months, leading to the conviction of Director Morgan and several high-ranking bank officials. But the man at the center of it had vanished into the fog of the Pacific Northwest. In a small, moss-covered cabin 3 miles outside a coastal town in Oregon, a digital watch beeped. It wasn't a $15 plastic piece anymore, but a rugged, solar-powered GPS watch, functional, durable, and still relatively modest. Max rolled out of bed, the floorboards creaking under his weight. He didn't check a stock ticker or an encrypted server. He checked the surf report. The hatchback. It was gone. In its place was a reliable 10-year-old 4x4 truck with a roof rack that held 2 surfboards and mountain bikes. It still had character and a few rust spots, but it didn't groan on the hills. The wardrobe, still largely thrifted. He had a favorite flannel with a patched elbow that he refused to throw away. Mia stepped onto the porch wearing one of his long-sleeved shirts with only 2 buttons pulled closed. A steaming mug of coffee was cupped in her hands, the warmth grounding her in the cool morning air. Her hair, falling just past her shoulders, still held a few loose curls that caught the morning light, making her look radiant. She turned her gaze toward Max, watching him with a quiet, thoughtful expression. She didn't miss the city, and she certainly didn't miss the fraud division. Over the last year, she'd transitioned into working remotely as a private consultant for an environmental nonprofit oozing her forensic skills to track illegal loggers instead of corporate sharks. "The swell is looking good at Devil's Punch Bowl," she said, leaning against the railing, but Eddie called, "He's in town!" Max paused, his hand on his surfboard. "Is he looking for work or just a beer? Knowing him?" "Both," she smiled. The Aegis millions were still there, tucked away in a series of ethical investment funds that Max barely looked at. He used the money to anonymously fund the local search and rescue team and a scholarship for the town's high school. To the locals, he was just Max, the guy who was surprisingly good at fixing broken gear and always knew which trails were washed out after a storm. One afternoon, while sitting on their boards waiting for a set, Mia looked over at him. "Do you ever miss it? The startup, the tech, the feeling of being the smartest guy in a room full of billionaires?" "I think I'm finally in the right room," he said, paddling out toward a rising wave. Max looks back, yelling to Mia, "Love ya, let's go." Thank you for watching and listening. There is more stories to come, and if you like this content, please subscribe and set a thumbs up. Please leave a comment of where you are from.